curriculum, counselling. And the cuts don't just end in schools. Local government, policing, prisons, everywhere we are seeing cuts. These organisations were able to absorb cuts for a number of years without damaging the front line. But I would argue that they have now reached stress points where that is no longer possible. But listen to the government. You have to conclude that they are deaf to all of it. The £2 billion they gave to social care in the budget should have been for 1 year, not for 3. The schools money was partly for welcome technical education, but a large part was for selective education at the expense of the vast majority of young people. In fact, virtually every item of this Tory budget was an attack on small businesses or the just about managing, like the self-employed and entrepreneurs. Instead of raising taxes on international online retail giants, who frankly have been getting away with murder for years, the Chancellor decided to clobber small businesses and effectively deferred for just 1 year the huge hike in business rates that will hit so many high street shops. If you need to see how it should be done, you are wasting your time looking at the government. Read the forthcoming Liberal Democrat review of business and taxes being chaired by Sir Vincent Cable. Conference, this year's budget was a fiasco. And there's a reason why Philip Hammond and Theresa May thought they could get away with it. And of course, it's Jeremy Corbyn. His total failure to hold Theresa May to account is Labour's problem. He let the government get away when millions of self-employed people needed someone to fight for them. The government still has not said when the Prime Minister knew about this rise, she's trying to wash her hands of it now, or what they're going to do to fill the black hole in their spending plans. And we don't know because the extreme and incompetent official opposition has failed. Conference, this country needs a real opposition. It needs us. It needs the Liberal Democrats. And this is before you consider the nationalism of the SNP. I mean, make no mistake, its determination to divorce Scotland from the UK would be an economic disaster. Its answer to Britain being ripped out of the European single market is for Scotland to be ripped out of the UK single market. Do not be fooled. An independent Scotland would be outside the UK and the EU, which would decimate the Scottish economy. But the SNP's narrow ideology, much like the Conservatives' ideology, will ruin the Scottish economy. But the SNP are determined to see independence no matter what the cost. If the SNP are truly European, then they should join us in the fight to let British people have a say on the terms of Brexit. Britain's economy is now in a perilous place. The past few weeks have shown worrying signs for our economic future. The pound has fallen again against the dollar, meaning our currency sits around 18% lower than the pre-referendum price, making imports pricier, putting retailers and manufacturers under increasing pressure to raise costs for the consumer. The latest figures show that our economy has begun to flatline once again, with falling production, and most worryingly in new house building, where growth is vital for our economy. Wages remain stubbornly subdued. Retail sales, long the backbone of our service-driven economy, have slowed to their lowest growth rate in years. Our reliance on consumer spending to prop up our economy is greater than ever. 2/3 of our GDP now depends on that consumer spending. But savings are falling, and consumer debt is rapidly rising on credit cards, personal loans, and overdrafts, and it is simply unsustainable. So it's no surprise that the Chancellor was recently told the growth of the British economy is sustained by consumer spending pinned against record levels of personal debt, which is secured, if at all, against house prices that the Bank of England described as well above equilibrium levels. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, oops. I misspoke on that. It wasn't recently. That was Vince Cable in 2003. He was then telling the then Chancellor what he didn't want to hear. And that Chancellor didn't see any sign of losing an election to a weak opposition, but he was building an economy on sand and ultimately paid the price. Now, I want to be clear. We cannot continue to rely on consumer spending and increasing personal debt to fuel our economy. As prices rise, thanks to the collapse in the pound, we are now beginning to see spending slow down, and as it slows, the consequences become dire. According to the Money Advice Services, 17 million adults in the UK have less than £100 set aside for a rainy day. Those on benefits have already seen their income squeezed thanks to the government's cruel decision to freeze or cut benefits. Our nurses, our teachers, our police have endured enough pay caps and are still set for 2 further years of below-inflation pay increases. Conference, no one listened to Vince Cable prior to the 2008 crisis, but he was right, and we all felt the consequences. We cannot let it happen again. Of course, the last crash was caused by the collapse of the American housing market, or triggered by it anyway. There is now a real danger that the next crash will be made in the UK, and that's thanks to Brexit. Brexit, the biggest single threat to our economy, and just one passing word in Philip Hammond's budget speech. Mr. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Only by burrowing down into the small print could you find that within 5 years, we will be borrowing over £100 billion more just to cope with the impact of Brexit. To put that in context, that's enough to build 115 brand new state-of-the-art hospitals or to pay almost 90,000 nurses a year. Actually, I could put that on the side of a bus. But presumably, this 100 billion black hole reflects the scenario of a positive trade deal with the EU. Because David Davis, and he's the economically literate one of the 3 Brexit men, told Parliament on Wednesday that government had no clue of the economic impact of the UK crashing out of the EU without a trade deal. I mean, no clue. Nothing. Nada. The words dereliction of duty hardly cover it. Conference, this government is driving this country towards the edge of a cliff blindfolded. And it's not even clear that when we leave the EU, we will be full members of the World Trade Organization and covered by its rules until 163 countries have agreed. Unfortunately, quite a number of those countries have bones to pick with us, not least because we made their joining the WTO rather difficult. And even with WTO rules, 90% of our trade with the EU would face significant tariffs, never mind all of the non-tariff barriers and costs. Services so vital to our economy are not even covered by WTO rules. We would have all the problems of the Irish border, the lack of a nuclear regulator, no medicines approval agency, no access to the European Investment Bank. I could go on and on. And EU citizens in the UK, as well as our citizens in the EU, would be in complete turmoil. For many in the UKIP wing of the Tory party, with which Theresa May has become so enamoured, this is actually desirable. And we have that guru of charm and thoughtful reasoning, Boris Johnson, saying that it is perfectly okay. And conference, this could happen. Oxford Economics, in their analysis of likely outcomes of the EU negotiations, suggest a 39% chance of falling back on WTO rules, 39%, only slightly behind the chance of a free trade deal. So no wonder we need a referendum to let the people decide when the deal or no deal is actually done. Theresa May is putting ideology before economics. And if the Conservatives weren't ideologically committed to cut after cut, pursuing an absolute surplus at the same time as tearing Britain out of Europe. Interestingly, the deficit job on the measures we used during the coalition would now have been done. We would have balanced the books on the current account. Instead, the pain goes on. Austerity continues, services are cut, and the public suffer a Brexit squeeze. Now, let me be clear. This is the Conservatives' choice. They have chosen this path and ignore the costs of their choices. We, with our measures, could ease the extreme financial pressure on public services like the NHS. Public sector workers could see the end of their pay cap. We could accelerate investment in infrastructure, especially affordable homes. We would be positioned to tackle the huge changes that are coming from the gig economy, robotics, artificial intelligence, climate change, and indeed turn these from challenges into opportunities. This is what we're fighting for, and this is why the Liberal Democrats are now the party of business. So I give the government this warning. You may not have a functional official opposition, but you still have a responsibility. Stop listening to the hard right of the Conservative Party, who want nothing more than a hard Brexit, and start working for the businesses and jobs that underpin our country, and start by committing to staying in the single market. Do not undermine our economy and thereby damage our NHS, social care and schools, and leave our vulnerable with inadequate support. Do not divide our country by rejecting common ground. Labour may give you no opposition, but we Liberal Democrats, led by Tim Farron, we will. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I'd like to thank my aides, Zoe O'Connell and Kasima Afzid. Now I'll hand over to Jeff Payne for the next session.
Good afternoon, Conference, and welcome to this next item on the agenda, F11. I wonder if people would mind settling down, please. This is a debate where we have a huge number of cards, around 3 times as many as I can call, I'm afraid. You'll find the motion itself at page 45 of the Conference agenda. There is one amendment. You'll find that at page 13 of today's Conference Daily. You'll notice that this is a debate in which we're going to have interventions. Interventions are short, 1-minute contributions from the intervention microphone over to my right, your left, as you face the stage. We'll be taking those between 10 to 5 and 5 o'clock or thereabouts, and I'll ask all the people who are going to intervene to stand by at the intervention microphone in good time. As I say, I've had a vast number of cards, so I'd be grateful if people could keep to time. What I'm going to do in this debate is, for the first half of it, call speakers who want to speak for the motion and against the motion. There are a number of cards from people who think that we shouldn't be losing any of our nuclear weapons at all, and I'll be dealing with that aspect of the debate in the first half. The second half is going to be a debate around Amendment 1, which you'll see, as I say, at page 13 of Conference Daily. So that's the way I'm going to structure it. Would Julian Huppert please stand by to move Amendment 1? And I now call Judith Jolly from North Cornwall, who is a member of the House of Lords and President of Devon and Cornwall Region, to propose the motion as a whole.
Conference, you won't find a single Lib Dem member who doesn't want to create a nuclear weapons-free Britain and a nuclear weapons-free world. As the first line of the motion reaffirms, every one of us is committed to ensuring that nuclear weapons are never used and ultimately put beyond use. Any disagreements today will come down to differences about how we achieve that goal. This is a volatile world. The UK faces global challenges in 2017 that would have seemed far-fetched only a few years ago. An expansionist Russia, an unpredictable US president, a strained European Union, and isolationism on the rise in every corner of the world. These threats are real, and it is a fundamental duty of the government to protect its people from attack, as well as the populations of our NATO allies and partners. Liberalism and internationalism is in retreat in many parts of the world. Nationalism and isolationism are the new flavours of the month. Conference, this is the first time that any UK political party has put working for worldwide nuclear disarmament at the centre of its foreign policy. We Liberal Democrats are internationalists first and foremost, defending the interests of our allies in NATO and our neighbours in Europe. Maintaining a credible minimum deterrent is part of our responsibility to those neighbours and allies, and has been for 60 years. UK's position in Europe, our role in NATO, our seat on the UN Security Council, and perhaps most importantly, our membership of the P5, and that's the nuclear powers of the UK, the US, France, Russia, and China. They give this country the leverage that we need in global disarmament talks. But conference, keeping a minimum nuclear deterrent does not mean having a like-for-like replacement of submarines. The working group heard from a range of speakers across the breadth of the debate on this issue. And one thing that became absolutely clear during these sessions was that the UK can step down the nuclear ladder and maintain a credible nuclear deterrent, one which stops other nuclear powers from firing at us because of our ability to retaliate. The time has come to move away from the hair-trigger posturing of the Cold War. That is why we're proposing a medium readiness, responsive posture. The UK would maintain a stable deterrence, a system protected from attack, and capability to change attack readiness if threats became more imminent. This could be achieved in various ways. One option would be to use irregular deployment patterns with periods where no submarine was deployed at sea, whilst providing sufficient ambiguity to potential adversaries. The paper sets out two policy caveats that are every bit as important. Firstly, this shift would be part of a glide path towards international nuclear disarmament. While the UK's commitment to the defence of its NATO allies must be resolute, a new push is needed by NATO and the P5 to reinvigorate the disarmament agenda. The P5 needs to get back to the negotiating table in order to strengthen the framework for the long-term elimination of nuclear weapons. Secondly, we must be open and transparent about the costs, viability, and vulnerabilities of Dreadnought. Liberal Democrats would ensure the next government defence security review in 2020 includes a full review and analysis of our nuclear capability and keep the cost of the Dreadnought programme under control. Conference, a submarine-based deterrent remains the safest system at this point, but it must be subject to the same evaluation as the UK's conventional capability. Last year, our Lib Dem MPs voted against the like-for-like replacement of the Vanguard programme. The Conservatives and most Labour MPs voted us down, and the political path for the successor Dreadnought was confirmed. Knowing that this decision was likely to be taken before our paper was concluded, The working group aimed to produce a policy that goes past this Parliament and into the coming decades. It widens its outlook beyond simply looking at British nuclear capability to include clear steps for global disarmament on which the UK can take the lead. Conference. Across the world, borders are being built and states are turning inwards. This policy gives our country a strong platform on which to pursue our key goal of a nuclear-free world while keeping a credible minimum deterrent. It embodies our internationalist principles by rejecting isolationism and by placing the UK at the centre of a global regime for nuclear disarmament. That is what this paper achieves, and I urge you to support the motion unamended.
Thank you very much, Judith. Would Emily Simpson from Mid Dorset and North Poole please stand by? And I now call Julian Huppert, who is the PPC for Cambridge, to come forward to propose Amendment 1. Julian.
Thank you very much, Conference, and it's great to be here. And I'm here proposing this amendment because I want to keep this country safe, and I hope you do too. Yes, the world is complex, the world is changing. It's not the was during the Cold War, and we should be ready for the next challenge, not the last one. Trident, or the part-time submarine that was so eloquently laid out by Judith, is not the right answer. It means spending over £1 billion on a single, outdated approach. The 5-yearly Government Strategic Defence and Security Review identified 6 Tier 1 threats that we face. Old fears like nuclear weapons, like invasion, have been relegated. Nuclear weapons are not the response to any of those 6 threats that the government says we face. Take something like cyber threat, probably the most realistic thing that Russia is likely to do if we're worried about Russia. Are we saying that if they hack a system, or somebody we think is them hacks a system, we would respond? How could mutually assured destruction work with a nuclear weapon like that? It does not make sense, Conference. But we're talking about spending just over a third of our defence procurement budget on the wrong solution that we probably wouldn't even use anyway. A third of all of the budget on this one thing. Let's look at our readiness in other areas. We have fewer tanks than we used to. In fact, we now have fewer tanks than Switzerland does. Switzerland hasn't used them for a while, but they have more. We are now in a stronger state with horses. We have more horses than we have tanks, and that would have been great 100 years ago. I could do the same thing about the state of our Navy, the state of our Air Force, the state of mental health support for our troops, for our veterans, for housing that they need. Do you really want to spend less money on special forces, on army, on navy, on air force, on people, in order to get nuclear weapons? Why would you reduce the spending on things which actually make us safer rather than this? That's why so many military experts, generals of all kinds, commanders say we should do other things, particularly spending on cyber. So if, like me, you care about the safety of this country, if, like me, you want to see us defended, Trident is the wrong answer and makes us less safe in a dangerous world. But I also want to talk about the moral issue that we have here. And I don't mean, Conference, I don't mean the bit about the exploding and killing millions of people. I assume we're all clear that that is an immoral thing to do and we're all opposed to it. But we talk and the motion starts off very well. I love the title, I love the beginning. We want to see a world that is free from nuclear weapons. How do we honestly go to another country that's considering having nuclear weapons and say, nuclear weapons are very dangerous, you shouldn't have them, but we are good people, so it's okay for us to have ours? How can that possibly be a line that we would use? I would much rather kickstart multilateral disarm by saying, we got rid of ours, you should get rid of yours, we meant it. Look at what we've done, follow our example. That will be much more effective than waiting. There is no other area where we would say, this is such a bad thing that we're going to keep doing it until everyone else stops. That is not a solution. So if you want to keep us safe, if you want to have the moral upper hand to achieve what the motion says it wishes to achieve, then vote for this amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian. Would Paul Reynolds from Tower Hamlets please stand by? And I now call Emily Simpson from Mid Dorset and North Poole, former welfare officer for Liberal Youth. She wants to speak against the motion as a whole. We're now, as I say, going to move on to a mini debate between those who oppose the motion completely and those who want it passed. Emily.
Hi, guys, and hi to my mum and dad who are watching this. Sorry, Mum. So many of you are going to say I was lucky enough to be raised in a world where I didn't have to face the Cold War. I fully accept that. I'm a history student. I am fully aware of the arguments about the Cold War, and I understand the paranoia, the fear surrounding growing up in that time. However, I am paranoid and moderately fearful about the time I'm growing up in. While my childhood was relatively safe, we're maybe facing a world that is not so much anymore. As the people who've put forth this motion said, Donald Trump is a thing. We are leaving Europe, and Russia is undoubtedly on a quest for expansion. There isn't actually a lot I disagree with in this motion. If you do want to vote for it, fair enough. I can't persuade you otherwise, and it's going to be very hard for me to persuade you otherwise. However, our commitment to the international community is one that I feel is crucial. For me, it is very important that our nuclear deterrence be adaptable. If this means increasing it, if this means keeping it as it is for the foreseeable future, I believe that is one way we need to go. I also accept Julian's point that absolutely our conventional weapons are terribly underfunded. Mental health of soldiers is awful. However, I feel like nuclear weapons have become a staple in today's society. I don't necessarily agree they're good or bad. However, I accept that that's just a reality we unfortunately live with. Sorry, I'm very nervous, can you tell? If you are to vote through this amendment, please consider the fact that our international community does depend on us being forward and accepting of our role. And please accept that with nuclear weapons that our allies do depend on us for now. If that means they have to depend on us even more later, I think we should be open to that. So conference, please keep that in mind. I know most of you already have an opinion and most can't be persuaded. So thanks for listening, and yay, let's have a nice debate.
Thank you very much. Would Harry Samuels from Oxford, West and Abingdon please stand by? And I now call Paul Reynolds, who's our PPC in West Ham and was a member of the working group, to speak for the motion as a whole.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Jeff, and hello to conference. My name is Paul Reynolds. I was a member of the working group, and I came to the working group as a neutral, despite my foreign policy wonkishness. And I listened very carefully to the arguments. We had arguments for and against, and some very good sort of technical, kind of neither analytical arguments in our evidence, which was very sort of deeply discussed, and I considered everything very carefully. I concluded that we should support a minimum deterrent, but if you like, more minimum than it is proposed at the present with the Dreadnought programme. And I came down against the like-for-like replacement. There's a particular reason. I mean, I work in international relations, and I do believe that we are closer to a nuclear conflagration than we have been since the Cuban crisis. And my feeling was that the real reason for Trident and the real reason for its successor Dreadnought is to prevent the UK being a target in a conflagration which would essentially be a conflagration between the United States and Russia and China, who have thousands and thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons compared to our small nuclear deterrent, which we hope to be even smaller. But I came to that conclusion, but not unconditionally. I think that the motion is a little more cautious than the report itself, because one of the important things for me in the report is that our support should be contingent on the costs, because as the costs of Dreadnought go higher, it means that the amount of money that we have to spend on the conventional forces is lower. So if it gets completely out of hand, and it might, it should change our response and our policy towards the Dreadnought replacement. But finally, I'd like to say something very quickly about unilateralism. And we are not a unilateralist party as a whole, and I was rather concerned by the idea that we should just walk away. I don't think that unilateral position has been properly understood as to what happens if we give up nuclear weapons. For example, almost certainly we would have cover from the US, which means nuclear weapons with over the policy and use. And I feel it's a serious difficulty for us as a party, is that if we propose to walk away from nuclear weapons without negotiating or without agreeing with our partners, it's not that different from walking away from the European Union without agreement from our partners. And I don't think we should have a walk-away policy. I don't think we should have a walk-away policy from nuclear weapons without discussion with our partners, and yet oppose a walk-away policy on Brexit. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Could Khalil Youssef from Kingston please stand by? And I now call Harry Samuels from Oxford West and Abingdon, who wishes to speak against the motion.
Conference, please forgive me any errors here, because despite the fact that actually tomorrow marks my 2nd anniversary as a member of the party, this is my first speech at a conference. But I want to speak to you in opposition of both the amendment and the motion as a whole today, as someone who hails from the, although my constituency party is Oxford West and Abingdon, as someone who hails from the wonderful naval city of Plymouth, as the son of a serviceman, but above all as a Liberal. Our commitment as a party to internationalism is one of the main reasons that I joined this party. And with increasing threats to our West, in the form of our orange friend, Mr. Trump, and with increasing threats to our East with the expansionist Russia, we cannot abrogate our responsibility to NATO or our international allies who look to us as one of the final pillars of strength and resoluteness in these trying times. Thank you. But most importantly, I feel that so many debates on Trident largely miss the point of why we keep it. Julian Huppert spoke about the fact that we'd never use it and that it's costly. Well, yes, it is. And yes, it is a deterrent and it does stop other people using them. But that is not the main point that I am in favour of retaining all of our nuclear weapons and retaining a continuous at-sea deterrent. When, after Brexit, we look weak to the world, and when it looks like Britain is receding from its responsibilities to the international community, we cannot just say to everyone in the world, actually, we're going to do even more of that, and we're going to get rid of another nuclear weapon, and we're going to say to everyone, actually, we don't care about protecting the world anymore. We absolutely have to show our strength. We have to stay at the table. We have to be able to be a global power, and we have to use our influence, what I think is our good liberal influence on the world, to be able to ensure that we don't allow any of these incursions and any of these threats to become even larger in the future. So for me, Trident, yes, some will call it a giant status. I think we need to keep that. I think we need to not recede from our obligations to the international community. And I think that as a result of that, we need to keep our entire at-sea deterrent. As a result of that, I would urge you all to reject this motion and reject the amendment as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would Tom Arms from Wandsworth please stand by? And I now call Khalil Youssef from Kingston Borough, who wishes to speak for the motion as a whole. Khalil.
Thank you, respected chairperson and fellow agents of change of this great party. when the time comes for us to govern, and we will govern again, we will reinvigorate Britain's global standing not by the threat of mutually assured destruction that the expansion of a nuclear program brings, but by being truthful champions of justice and integrity. Today, I ask this conference to support these policy motions on a world free of nuclear weapons and to support them unequivocally. Our memories will not be shortened by the political rhetoric of those who would sprint with Olympic speed towards a nuclear arms race. When the nuclear bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was done upon hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children who did not choose to be self-destroyed. Instead, a 12,600-degree ball of fire was imposed upon them, and they were frozen like statues as their skin melted away. Drinking water, food, and vegetation was contaminated by radiation, and epidemics of disease ran amok. Today, some 72 years later, experts tell us that of leukemia and breast cancer have increased in Japan because of those nuclear bombs. Yet still, there are some that support nuclear proliferation. They say that having nuclear weapons avoids the chances of nuclear war, that nuclear bombs are a deterrent to conventional war, that somehow nuclear weapons are merely a diplomatic tool. Well, they are wrong. Successful diplomacy is achieved by truthfulness and by recognizing the rights of each other. It leads to balances of power, respect, justice, and equality between nations that nuclear weapons in the hands of an individual that is prepared to protect one life by sacrificing 1,000 will never be able to achieve. These are brave motions. They are fearless and forward-thinking, and they seek to secure for us and our world a lasting freedom. I believe that the people of this conference are not among those who would purge our principles, nor are we among the future custodians of this nation who would choose ease over ethics, because these are not easy decisions. Make no mistake, when we are in government, we will defend our nation, and we will use our military proportionally if need be. But we will ensure peace, security, and justice by strengthening international cooperation, by pursuing the recognition and implementation of international legal obligations, and by working towards a world free of the mutually assured destruction that the use of nuclear weapons will surely bring. We will do that because we are a party of vision, a party of leadership, and a party of the positive change that our nation so determinedly craves.
Draw your remarks to a close, please. Thank you.
I please request you to vote for this motion. Please vote for this motion in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And that was Khalil's first speech at a federal conference. Could I ask the following people, please, to go over to the intervention microphones, because in a couple of speeches' time we'll be taking the interventions. The intervention microphones are over to my far right, your left. Here are the names: Janet King from Bromsgrove, Elliot Bermudez Galton from Bolton, Andrew Hudson from Barrow and Furness, Jackie Bell from East Lothian, Gerald Vernon Jackson from Portsmouth, Liz Leffman from Witney, Elizabeth Wilson from East Lothian, Zoe O'Connell from Cambridge, Keith Baldry from South Hams and Brixham, and Samuel Harris from Southampton. Those are going to be our interveners in 2 speeches' time. Would Christine Cheng please stand by? I now call Tom Arms, who wishes to speak against the motion as a whole.
Yes, I'm speaking against the motion and the amendment. My name is Tom Arms, as in the weapons industry, which makes me uniquely qualified to speak on nuclear bang topics. Unfortunately, I only have 3 minutes to speak on a vitally important and complicated issue, and I've just invested 10 seconds, so I'll skip the mandatory punny jokes and move on as quickly as possible. So, starting with point 1, the motion before you strongly implies that the Cold War is over. Everything is now hunky-dory. We all love one another, and the wishes of beauty contestant winners or beauty pageant winners all around the world have finally been realized. Therefore, the need for a robust nuclear deterrent has, poof, vanished. Well, it's true, we no longer face a Soviet Union intent on imposing its political ideology on the rest of the world. No, now we have a corrupt, nationalistic, egomaniac intent on restoring Russian greatness by imposing hegemony on as many countries as possible. On top of that, the Russians have reversed the Soviet-era no first use of nuclear weapons policy and have just last month breached the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Yes, it's also true that Russian society is now much more open. Not completely, but it's much more open from the days of, well, when we had to sit there watching the television, analyzing the lineup on the May Day parades. This makes people think that we can now work with Moscow. But the fact of the matter is that Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was perfecting post-truth diplomacy long before Donald Trump was a twinkle in Steve Bannon's eye. Next, Russia is expanding just as America is starting to withdraw. Donald Trump is an isolationist. He refuses to help NATO, or at least he says it is obsolete. Do we want to negotiate away part of our umbrella just when the Americans are threatening to withdraw theirs, or at the very least, punch bloody great holes in it?
Would you draw your remarks to a close, please?
Point 3.
I don't think that's drawing your remarks to a close,
Let's be realistic.
please.
The nuclear genii is out of the bottle.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to ask you to stop.
Okay,
thank you so much. You've had your time. Thank you very much indeed, Tom Arms. Right, after the next speech, we're going to move to the intervention. So would the interveners please stand by. And I now call Christine Cheng from Kingston Borough, a member of FPC, who wishes to speak for the motion.
Thank you so much, Conference, and thank you for welcoming me to the party as a new member. I would like to speak I'd like to speak in favor of this motion, and I want you to think about what the world is like right now in terms of global insecurity and global instability, and particularly, as the gentleman before me was saying, about the threat from Russia. So since Crimea was annexed, we've seen deeply increasing tensions between the West and Russia. The US has increased numbers in the Black Sea, and they've deployed more troops to their bases in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and in Germany. Along the border with Russia, we are seeing an increase in troops. So in Poland right now, we have a US-led battalion with 4,000 troops, including the UK, who has a presence there. In Latvia, the Canadians have led a battalion of 1,200 troops. In Lithuania, there's a battalion of German-led troops out there. In Estonia, the UK is leading a battalion of 800 troops. All 28 NATO countries have sent troops to the Russian border in recent months. This is the biggest buildup of troops along that border since the end of the Second World War. We have to remember that Putin really respects strength, and that Russians, long after Putin is gone, also respect strength. And that the kind of fevered nationalism that he is stoking up right now is going to last long beyond the time that he has left office. And that's something to bear in mind, not just for the next 5 years or for the next 10, but for a long time thereafter. And this leads to the second point, which is that remaining a member of the nuclear club is probably more important today than it ever has been. So I know not all of you agree with this, and I understand why you don't. But we have to bear in mind that this is the world that we live in with Brexit coming down the horizon. And whether you like Brexit or you don't like Brexit, and we all don't like Brexit, we may still have to contend with that. And being part of the nuclear club will give us more leverage and more flexibility in terms of defense cooperation with our neighbors. So be that as it may, we may not want to use that kind of leverage, but it is leverage nonetheless that will be useful in those negotiations. In addition to the fact that these are our neighbors, geography is destiny to some extent, and we need to be able to use those nuclear weapons in the case that they, well, hopefully would never be used, but to be able to protect our neighbors, right? This is Europe after all, and we still have to live next to them come whatever may happen in 2 years' time. So thank you very much, and I hope you will support this motion.
Thank you very much indeed. And that was Christine's first speech at a federal conference. After the next, set of speakers are going to be our interveners, and I'll call them to come to the intervention microphone one after another. They get 1 minute contributions. The first speaker after the interventions will be Christine Jardine from Aberdeenshire East, so could she stand by, please? Our first intervener is Janet King from Bromsgrove.
Thank our previous speaker for proving to us that we need to vote for the amendment. We need to spend money on conventional weapons. It's tanks that are in Estonia, not nukes. What hasn't been mentioned so far today by anyone is in 9 days' time, there will be an incredibly important conference called by the United Nations with nuclear weapons, let me read this, to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, and that's a nuclear weapons convention, leading towards their total elimination. It's scheduled for the 27th of March, with a follow-up on the 15th of June to the 7th of July. It was not mentioned in this policy motion, which is the product of 2 years' work by a working party of so-called experts. Why? Why isn't it mentioned in the press largely? Because it's not called by the P5, though the
Thank
P5
you very much.
are in...
Thank you very much. We are very strict on the minute, I'm afraid, for interventions. Our next intervener is Elliot Bermudez-Galton from Bolton.
Hello, conference. Political parties have to do two things: work to ideology and what we want to achieve in the future, but deal with the reality of the situation today. Ideology. I'm pretty sure we all hate nukes. Can't think of anyone that would enjoy having a nuke in their back garden, in their country, to use it. And that should be our aim, where we aim to get rid of nukes off this globe. But at the same time, any political party that wants to be taken seriously for a party of government has to protect its citizens and deal with the reality of the situation. The world is a dangerous place, and we have to deal with that reality with one single thing: a necessary evil. And unfortunately, in my opinion, the ultimate definition of a necessary evil is the Trident nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrew Hudson from Barrow and Furness.
Thank you, Chair. This paper doesn't appear to have dealt with some of the issues raised in the consultative paper. Nothing regarding employment at Barrow, Faslane and Harwell. Nothing about policy on submarines with regard to propulsion of hunter-killers, or has it answered them by effectively retaining the successor class, or dreadnought as it now called? Trident Light's the part-time deterrent, whilst it might be more credible than Corbyn's absurd policy of continuing with Trident, but just announcing how you're not going to use it, but it's not much more credible. The idea of sending submarines out in a crisis, but not at other times, is flawed, as there'll be hunter-killer submarines waiting near the Northern Channel, or whatever exit point they use. I mean, that was going on throughout the Cold War, cat and mouse. The Royal Navy has insufficient ships to carry out its present commitments because the money is going on expensive projects like renewing Trident and 2 aircraft carriers that are too expensive to risk. Now, that's, to me, it's the Royal Navy and things like that, the funding should be going on, not Trident. Now, the amendment largely meets my objectives in dealing with that and provides work for Barrow, but it's unilateralist, and I just want to downgrade it even more, not abolish it.
Thank you, Andrew. Jackie Bell from East Lothian, please.
An issue with nuclear weapons is those who seek to have them. In May 2013, I was in North Korea at the time of missile testing. It's the only country where I've taken pictures of what was on TV. Musicians playing against film of launching missiles, marching troops and advancing tanks with a smiling, waving Kim Jong-un. There were similar films playing on large screens near Pyongyang Station. Kim is unpredictable, as his brother found out recently. America has now elected a president that potentially trumps Kim for unpredictability. The Times today has Tillerson, the US Secretary of State, threatening military action against North Korea if it continues to develop its weapons program. China's angry about the decision by US to deploy to South Korea the time missile defense system. Meanwhile, Putin sees Brexit threatening to weaken the EU and NATO sends troops to the Baltics. That's very real to me. I have a house.
Thank you, Jackie. Gerald Vernon-Jackson from Portsmouth, please.
Colleagues, three good reasons why you should support the motion and oppose the amendment. The first is we're an internationalist party and always have been. Why would we just give up our table at the top table for nothing in return, which is what the amendment tries to do? The second is we've never been a unilateralist party. We've always believed in working with other people. This amendment would make us a unilateralist party. And thirdly, we need Lib Dem MPs, as many as possible, to fight the Conservatives. If we support becoming a unilateralist party, see what the Tories have done to Corbyn and his credibility. We will not get as many seats. We won't be there to fight for education, for health, for working with our European neighbours if we pass this amendment. That's why we need to make sure we keep at the big table, at the UN and at the P5.
Thank you, Gerald. Liz Leffman from Witney, please.
Conference, I agree with everything that the previous speaker said, but I would like to add the following. Julian used the word moral several times in his speech about the amendment. There is no point, Conference, in being on the moral high ground with a warm feeling in our stomachs if it means that we cannot engage in the discussion which is at the centre of this motion. And that is to create a world free of nuclear weapons. We cannot do this, disengage from other nuclear powers and set ourselves aside. So please vote against this amendment and for the motion as a whole.
Very much. Dr. Elizabeth Wilson from East Lothian, please.
Chair, fellow delegates, I want to focus on the word security, which I think in this motion has a rather narrow interpretation. What makes for human security? It's learning to live with each other without using violence as a means of conflict resolution. In the UK, we've banned corporal punishment in schools. Domestic violence is a crime. But internationally, we're willing to threaten other nations and ultimately the UK with annihilation. What about non-violent methods of conflict resolution? Diplomacy, mentioned in passing. Passive resistance, non-violent action. Strikes, boycotts, street theatre, mediation and reconciliation. Where are they in this impoverished motion? They're all skills that can be learnt. The success stories of non-violent approaches can be seen in the Berlin Wall and the end of apartheid. Two things I thought I would never, ever see in my lifetime without bloodshed. Compare this with...
Thank you very much. Zoe O'Connell from Cambridge is our next intervener.
Thank you. As part of my army training, I was given a wonderful little booklet called Survive to Fight on how to survive a nuclear war, or rather the aftermath of it. Now, soldiers are well aware of the effect of nuclear war and also prone to black humour. Describe this booklet as, frankly, the finest literary works the world has ever seen. A quote from a slightly irreverent website by soldiers. Frankly, if they'd just written, "You're all going to die on the front," it would have saved a lot of time and money. There's no need for that level of destruction in the world today. I'm happy to walk away from that level of destruction, and it should be seen as a sign of strength, and we should make it a sign of strength, not some sort of sign of diplomatic weakness.
Thank you very much. Keith Baldry from South Hams and Brixham.
Three of the reasons why I strongly urge you to support Amendment 1. Firstly, the moral case for unilateral disarmament, which Julian Huppert so adequately described to you. Secondly, it will allow funds to be released to strengthen and increase the conventional forces, something which is the right thing to do, but which is also popular with the public. And thirdly, recent history has demonstrated that the threats to this country come as much from within as from without, and it will allow funds to be spent on increasing our intelligence.
Thank you very much. And finally, our final intervener is Samuel Harris from Southampton.
I'm speaking for the amendment and against the motion. As an ex-member of the Territorial Army and a current pacifist, I have a background that I believe gives me a view from both sides. I fundamentally cannot support any movement towards keeping a system that is designed to destroy whole families from newborn babies to OAPs. If you believe in nuclear weapons, you must accept that one day it may be called upon to use it against families. And as a person who respects all human life in every single form, I cannot agree with the motion, and the amendment goes a step towards taking it back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I thank all of our interveners? We're now going to move back to the main debate. We're going to move particularly to a debate around the issue of Amendment 1. So would Liz Lynn from Mid Worcestershire please stand by? And I now call Christine Jardine from Aberdeenshire East, and a member of the Scottish Executive Committee who wishes to speak particularly from a Scottish perspective.
Good afternoon, Conference. I'm Christine Jardine, and I have the dubious distinction of having stood against Alex Salmond in the last general election in Gordon and lost. Thank you. The scars have healed, but I do still like to mention it occasionally for the sympathy. Although I stood in Aberdeenshire, I am originally from that stunningly beautiful part of the Clyde coast, which has given us several outstanding parliamentarians, including Ray Meachey and Alan Reid, but is also home to the Faslane Naval Base. As a child, I was well aware that that strange, dark place we used to pass on our Sundays out was also a guarantee we wouldn't likely survive the first wave of a nuclear attack. Was it scary? Oh, you bet. Did it make me hate nuclear weapons and long for the sort of thing this motion calls for? Indeed. But it was also reassuring. Reassuring that as long as Faslane was there, then Leonid Brezhnev and the Soviet Union would think twice about making us use it. And it wasn't just reassuring in diplomatic terms. The economy of that part of the Clyde has come to depend almost entirely on the Royal Navy presence. It's still one of the most deprived areas of the UK. So imagine the nuclear holocaust that would be caused by withdrawing that deterrent. Then add in the loss of the construction jobs and service industries for the new fleet, and it becomes even worse. The areas like Rosyth, which, like the Clyde, now has little, if any, opportunity to offer the communities who for generations have taken pride in using their skills to defend this country. I've heard the argument that we now face no nuclear threat. It's inappropriate. Well, this morning before I left home, I watched a news report about Estonia and British troops being sent there to defend against Russian expansionism. We've already seen that they can be serious about it in Georgia and the Ukraine. The Ukraine, which did away with its nuclear weapons, probably in the same sort of spirit that Julian hoped about, hoping they would kickstart unilateralism, which didn't happen. And as I drove down from Scotland still coming to terms with the prospect of another divisive and damaging referendum, I thought about those families and the communities, all facing another 2 years of uncertainty, an economy hit hard by the slump in the oil industry, and of course the looming prospects of being dragged out of Europe. At times in Scotland at the moment, it's difficult not to feel that we are just some constitutional chew toy for Nicola Sturgeon and Theresa May. Well, Conference, with all that in mind, remembering those jobs, please let us go back to Scotland and say the Liberal Democrats care about our economy. They care about Scotland's economy. Yes, we care about world peace. Yes, we want to de-escalate the nuclear arms, but we will not do it at your cost. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would Alistair Carr Orkney and Shetland, please stand by. And I now call Liz Lynn from Mid Worcestershire, a former MP and MEP, a member of FCC, who wishes to speak for Amendment 1.
So here we are again, another fudge on nuclear weapons. We have had several working groups over the last few years, and it has been debated by conference many, many times. But still, we have a fudge. We knew what would happen when the latest working up. That is why a lot of us wanted a decision to be made there and then at the conference when it was debated. The report is called A World Free of Nuclear Weapons, and there is a lot in it that I agree with. But then it goes on to conclude that we must keep Trident, even though most of the defence professionals say it's a white elephant. The Ministry of Defence itself have not been able to say in what situation nuclear weapons would be useful. And the global threat has more to do with terrorism and cyber warfare, and nuclear weapons would not do anything about either of those. At the same time as we're proposing to spend billions of pounds on a nuclear deterrent, we are denying our conventional forces the equipment and the upgrade they so desperately need. This is not just according to us. The generals have been saying this for year after year after year. At the same time, the government are trying to find billions of pounds of welfare cuts. And this is at the same time that the NHS is in crisis. Hand on heart, can we honestly say this is worth taxpayers' money? I don't think it makes sense at all. And our independent nuclear deterrent is not even independent. It is reliant on America. And even they prefer us to have a strong conventional force than this. And how can we say to North Korea and Iran, oh, you shouldn't have nuclear weapons, but we're going to hang on to ours? So why has this fudge been suggested? Is it to do with our status in the world? I doubt it, because it's highly unlikely that we would lose our place on the UN Security Council if we gave it up. So is it to do with protecting our country? Also highly unlikely. Other non-nuclear countries have not faced a greater threat than us. So what is it about? I believe, sadly, it's more to do with about not rocking the boat and to try and sit on the fence and to appeal to everyone. And in the end, it will appeal to no one. And that is what fudges are usually about. But we as a party are better than that. We have proved it over our stance on the EU. Let us now have the courage to prove it over this as well. I urge you to support the amendment.
Thank you, Liz. Would Lucy Salek from Lewisham please stand by? And I now call Alistair Carmichael, who wishes to speak against Amendment 1.
Oh, thank you, Conference. Liz Lynn stole my opening line. I was going to say, here we go again. I've been coming to Liberal and Liberal Democrat conferences since the 1980s, and we have always struggled with this, and I think you can see today, because we have a debate of this sort, it is still a difficult issue. But, Conference, I tell you, it really ought to be a difficult issue. And beware of one thing, beware, please, of those who pretend that there is some easy answers to these very complex international problems. Now, my good friend Julian Huppert, in moving this amendment, which, let's be quite clear about it, is essentially a unilateralist position, made what he called the moral case. And I want to just address that, because it was the same case that Liz Lynn made there. First of all, understand the moral case, which I respect. I disagree with it, but I respect. If it is to be taken to its logical conclusion, means that you cannot remain a member of NATO. Because it's not just about getting rid of our nuclear weapons. You understand that NATO is a nuclear alliance. I know that not every member of NATO has nuclear weapons, but they do all have to sign up to the principle of nuclear armament. And you cannot, if you are making a moral case morally accept that we don't have nuclear weapons, but we will accept the protection of others who do. Julian also brought forward another argument, and again, Liz just reiterated it there. They said, how do we go to the likes of North Korea and Iran and say that we have got nuclear weapons, so we deny them the right? Conference, just think about that for a second. Are they really thinking that if you go to Iran or if you go to North Korea, that they are going to be impressed by our morality to the extent that they will deny themselves nuclear weaponry? Conference, our struggles with this issue over the years, I suspect, will continue. We have always ended up in a multilateralist position. We do that because we are an internationalist party, and at a time when the forces of nationalism and isolationism are rampant across the world, it is more important than ever that this party maintains these principles. That is why I ask you to accept the motion and to reject Amendment 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would Greg Simpson from Ettrick, Roxburgh and Berwickshire please stand by? And I now call Lucy Salek from Lewisham, as a Vice Chair and Diversity Champion, who wishes to speak for Amendment 1.
Thank you, Conference. I am normally a pragmatist when it comes to foreign and military policy, but today I speak to you as a humanitarian, and I speak to you about international humanitarian law. And through that, I wish to put nuclear weapons in perspective. Nuclear weapons are different from any other weapon. For decades, the UK has consistently been in favour of a rules-based international order. And central to that order is the protection of civilians, and particularly the protection of civilians in conflict. I wish to remind Conference of two international obligations and agreements of which the UK is signatory. The first is the Convention on Anti-Personnel Mines, which we joined in 1997, which was done explicitly because those weapons kill or maim hundreds of people every week, mostly innocent and defenceless civilians, and especially children. In 2010, we ratified the Convention banning cluster munitions for the same reason. I remind us of these today because we are talking about maintaining a weapon that indiscriminately murders unarmed non-combatants, and that is an inescapable fact. We are a long way from the days of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but we do have their stories to remind us. Yoshiro Yamawaki was just 11 years old when he was nearly killed in Nagasaki, and he talked about his experience afterwards. There are many dead bodies littering the roads. They had become swollen and discoloured, and as we stepped on them, the skin would become peeling off like an overripe peach. There were many in the river, and we saw a woman with what looked like a long belt dragging behind, and when we looked closer, we realised it was her intestines. We turned our eyes away. My brother screamed. He saw a dead boy just 6 or 7 years old. I will make no apologies for deliberately trying to manipulate you emotionally. I make no apologies for that. We, as Liberal Democrats, are against the torture of civilians. We are against the targeting of civilians, and the discussion today, whether we like it or not, is about that. It is a weapon like any other. If you would not accept the anti-personnel mines by our military, and if you believe that owning cluster munitions is no deterrent against others using it against us, and if you believe that we can eventually reach a nuclear-free world, I urge you to support in favour of this amendment or against the policy as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Would Louise Bloom from Eastleigh please stand by? And I now call Greg Simpson from Ettrick, Roxburgh and Berwickshire, who wishes to speak against Amendment 1.
Conference, I want to talk today about two things: politics and morality. Next year, we'll celebrate the 30th anniversary of the merger of the Social Democrats and the Liberals that created this great party of ours. I've been a member for 20 of those years, and I've sat with you and I've watched this same debate on numerous occasions. And each time we've come to vote, we've chosen to be steadfast in the position that we've maintained for all of those years. Minimum deterrence and multilateral disarmament. I believe we will do so again today, but it is different because it's now one member, one vote. I'll be voting myself on this after 20 years for the first time, and so will many others. This party has doubled its membership since the last election. Now, our new members, they could have chosen to join Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, but you didn't. Just like Shirley Williams, Dick Newby, Charles Kennedy of the SDP, they rejected the anti-European, anti-NATO unilateralism of Michael Foot's party. So our new members have rejected the same in Jeremy Corbyn's, and you've joined with us. We've never been a unilateralist party. That is not our identity. Our political roots are as an internationalist party. That is who we are, pro-EU, pro-NATO, pro-multilateralism. The morality of this long-held position starts from a simple proposition. We must strive in everything that we do to prevent nuclear war ever happening. That must be our overriding goal, because it is a goal that is steeped in the highest moral principle, the protection of all human life. Disarmament may ultimately help us achieve that. But if our goal is simply to eliminate Britain's nuclear arsenal, we abandon that high moral principle because we'd be just walking away from protecting our own people and our allies in a world getting more dangerous by the day, walking away from the global disarmament table. Britain's nuclear weapons account for 1% of the global total, so we'd be leaving 99% in place, washing our hands of it. Nothing to see here, Gov. But Britain does have a moral responsibility here. Preventing nuclear war is our problem. We were part of the Manhattan Project that created these awful weapons in the first place. We were the spark that brought this flame into being. So we have a moral responsibility to make sure that flame does not consume us. Scrapping Trident unilaterally will not do that. It is the morally responsible thing to do.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Greg. Would David Knapp from Warrington please stand by? And I now call Louise Bloom from Eastleigh, who is a councillor who wishes to speak for Amendment 1.
My notes start the same as Alistair's. Here we go again. We're delighted to have all the newbies here. We think it's fabulous that the party has doubled in a year or 18 months or so. But for some of us old hacks, we have been here again before. So 1986, we did win. We did win the unilateral debate. I was there as a young Liberal, so we did win and we can win again. Labour support Trident. Jeremy Corbyn might not, but Labour do. So for anyone who's worried about what Labour may or may not think, I wouldn't worry too much. I want to pick up on the point, what does multilateral actually mean? And what does unilateral actually mean? Because, to be honest with you, we know that multilateralism isn't actually going to happen. The motion talks about kickstarting new talks. So, do we really think that lovely Mr. President Trump or Mr. Putin are going to be kickstart into new talks? Or then we can think of that equally nice Mr. Netanyahu in Israel. Now, I know he says he hasn't got any nuclear weapons, but I'm not totally convinced on that one. And then equally, we have North Korea. Are they going to be kick-started into these multilateral talks? I don't think so. So I think we actually have to be honest on this point. It's not going to happen. Therefore, why are we going to spend the money on Trident? The amendment talks about underfunded conventional forces. Other people have mentioned tanks and horses, and we could also mention having our troops carried around in vehicles that actually have proper placing on them so they don't get blown up. The figures we're talking about are huge. So far, it's cost about £4.8 billion to develop Trident replacement. But then we're looking at forward costs of 31 billion. And this is a bit I really like. There's 10 billion overspend budget. Now, as a councillor, I'd be a bit worried if I was looking at overspends on Eastleigh's budgets of 10 billion. Even we couldn't spend that much money. So I'm asking you to be honest with yourselves. Politicians are accused often of not being honest, but let's be honest. We are not going to achieve multilateralism, however lovely it would be and however much we might all like it. So I'm asking you to be honest, support the amendment, spend our money on underfunded conventional forces where it's needed, and don't waste money on Trident. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. After this speech, we're going to move to the summations. So would David Grace please stand by to summate on Amendment 1. I'm going to call one last speaker against the motion as a whole, and that is David Knapp from Warrington. David.
Hello, Conference. Why do I believe in a nuclear deterrent? It's basically in the extremely unlikely, but still possible circumstances whereby another nuclear nation were to perpetrate a strike on our country, rendering everyone I love and care, well, dust. It is to mean that if they were to do that, they would receive the exact same result. It's a difficult decision, but one that I feel fundamentally I have to choose. So coming to the policy itself, I feel the Policy Committee have developed a compromise that has tried to appease the unilateralists but has failed. And it wouldn't be a nuclear debate at a nuclear weapons debate at a Lib Dem conference without Julian once again steadfastly reminding us of his unilateralist viewpoint. But not only has this compromise motion failed to appease them, it also isn't practical. The whole point of a multilateralist approach to nuclear disarmament is everyone steps back together. While this motion may be altruistic in nature, do you really expect the US, Russia, France, China, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea to reciprocate? And then what do you do when tension increases, such that a return to a high readiness posture is required? You escalate things further. The beauty of the continuous at-sea deterrent is that it is consistent. In the event of an increase in tensions, you do not begin a chain of escalating actions as each party responds to the action of the other. Then there's the issue of reducing the SSBN fleet. That's the fleet of submarines that carry the nuclear missiles from 4 to 3. We have actually operated a free-boat SSBN fleet in the past. Not intentionally, but during the transition from the Resolution class to the Vanguard class of SSBNs, delays to the latter and age-related reliability problems of the former led to us having only 3 operational SSBNs in the early 90s. Since an SSBN can only return from a continuous at-sea deterrent role if another SSBN is ready to take its place, this resulted in deployments lasting far in excess of normal operations. We have a duty to our courageous submariners to ensure we do not force them to spend hundreds of days at sea away from their loved ones. Reducing from 4 to 3 SSBNs also removes any contingency or flexibility in the fleet. If one boat was in a long-term refit and another was undergoing maintenance, the third boat were there to develop a major problem and had to come into port, we would have no nuclear deterrent. Therefore, I believe like-for-like replacement with 4 Dreadnought-class boats is the minimum workable option. Finally, I'd like to counter the ludicrous suggestion in the amendment that underwater drones may undermine our nuclear deterrent. When Labour's Foreign Affairs spokesperson Emily Thornberry claimed this last year, she was immediately
Just hold on. I'll tell. I normally give people a sentence over the red light, so I'll do so for this speaker as well.
Well, she was thoroughly countered by people I believe are experts. Whilst I admire the idealism of both the motion and the amendment, I believe that neither are realistic and practical
Right, that
policies.
is time. That is time. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right, would Neil Stockley please stand by to summate on the motion as a whole? And I now call David Grace from Cambridge to summate on Amendment 1. David.
Conference, this motion is not another fudge. It's the same old fudge. It repeats exactly the position we have at the moment with some additional persiflage. It contains some interesting analysis. It goes through the situation and security around the world and mainly says that nuclear weapons are no answer to that. The amendment agrees with that. It says we should beef up negotiations. The amendment agrees with that. But I say, don't hold your breath. Multilateral negotiations don't have a great record. The amendment says phase out Trident and cancel the replacement program successor. It doesn't say do it overnight. Decommissioning a nuclear weapon system isn't simple. It actually says, read it, it says in consultation with our allies. It may be that we would make a better contribution to NATO with our conventional forces. We are told that the world is much more dangerous, is volatile. Basically, people say, look, Putin, look, Trump, we've got to have nuclear weapons. Nobody draws the dots. Nobody connects the premises with the conclusion. The Ministry of Defence has no scenario, and this is their job to look for these things, it has no scenario where our nuclear weapon system is going to help with what Putin's up to. The nuclear weapon system we have is not independent. It is utterly dependent on American software and hardware. We have to take the missiles back to be repaired in Georgia. How's that an answer to Trump? If Trump's the problem, Trident is not the answer. We're told this is a debate, we're always told this, between unilateralists and multilateralists. And the word unilateralist is thrown around as some kind of insult. Actually, it's a debate between people who are serious about defence. And there are different ways of being serious about defence. If you're serious about defence, you don't bet the farm on a system that may be out of date when it comes into use in 2030. Underwater drones and cyber warfare could make it out of date. That's not Emily Thornberry. That is Des Brown, who was Labour Secretary of State for Defence. We're told that we can afford successor. Judith says we're going to keep it under control. The Public Accounts Committee does not agree. Read their reports on defence spending and how the projects always overspend. Read what Ministry of Defence officials say. One chap says he can't sleep at night because of the risk. That money could be spent where we need to spend it. We have the smallest army we've had since the days of Napoleon. Worse than that, it is wholly inadequately equipped. Not my words, that's the Chilcot report. I'm ashamed that we sent young men and women to Iraq with inadequate footwear and inadequate vehicles. We shouldn't be doing that. The Navy only has 6 destroyers, which can't work for a long time in warm waters because the engines pack up. We could not now mount the Falklands campaign. The man who spoke from Plymouth, in Plymouth there is an 80-year-old power cable that is not safe to use with ships. There's a lot more I could tell you if there was time. Don't let anyone tell you that we can afford the conventional improvements and Trident. We cannot. Not only will we not be able to improve things, they'll get worse. I give you the words of Malcolm Chalmers of the Royal United Services Institute. The rising costs of successor will lead to cuts in air, maritime and land forces. The time has come to choose. If you're serious about defence, support this amendment. This debate is about fear, but it's not fear of Russia. It's fear of the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail will attack us if we pass this motion. They did when we passed its equivalent 3 years ago. They will attack us whether we pass this motion or this amendment. The time has come to take this seriously.
The time has come. Would you draw your remarks to a close, please? Thank you.
And show that you have the guts.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. I now call Neil Stockley from Bromley who is chair of the working group, to summate on the motion as a whole. Neil.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. First of all, can I thank all members of the working group for their hard work, which was carried out in good faith. The staff from Party HQ, Ashley Day, Fiona Todd and Christian Moon have done a great job and they deserve our gratitude. From the start, we all recognised that answering the many complex questions we had to address was going to be challenging. Last summer's Commons vote for Trident renewal added to our burden. The replacement programme is crawling along, but we can't know for sure how far it will have gone, which contracts will be signed, or how much money will have been spent by the time of the next general election. Yet we persevered, we took an evidence-based approach to our task and have brought forward a new policy paper for this weekend, as the previous conference requested. Now, some people here and outside the hall questioned my sanity when I took this role on. Well, I can only say my commitment to this issue goes back to my teens, and that's a very long time ago now, and my involvement in campaigns for a nuclear-free New Zealand and a nuclear weapons-free zone in the South Pacific. And I'm delighted to say that today we can be the first UK political party to say that we want to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons and to present a strategy for making it happen. Okay, I realise some people in the debate aren't comfortable with talking about working for a nuclear-free world. They don't think it's realistic or practical. Others, particularly supporters of Amendment 1, say we should give up on international action or attach less importance to it. What they're really saying is we're destined to live in a world where more nations and more people possess the ultimate weapons of destruction. As Barack Obama said, such fatalism is a deadly adversary. For if we believe that the spread of nuclear weapons is inevitable, then in some way we are admitting to ourselves that the use of nuclear weapons is inevitable. Which brings me to Amendment 1, which calls for a one-sided UK disarmament. Throughout the work and the deliberations of the working group, I heard no evidence to back up the claims made by the supporters of Amendment 1 that such a disarmament would cause any threshold states to give up their ambitions or encourage any nuclear weapon states to give up their weapons. What it says is we should pull the duvet cover over, it's all too hard, stay in bed, leave others to do the hard work and take our own shelter under the nuclear umbrella of NATO, which is the American nuclear umbrella. I say we're better than that. If as Liberals we stand for freedom, we must stand for the right of people everywhere to live free from fear in the 21st century. Our goal should not be for the UK to get rid of its nuclear weapons. Our real goal should be to make sure that all the world's nuclear weapons are put beyond use. Now, we're not naive or realistic, and I really didn't come down on the last shower, I can promise you that. We recognise the UK cannot do this alone. We understand that the only way to disarm and control nuclear weapons is through international negotiations, which have been very successful since the 1980s in reducing the stocks of nuclear weapons. Yes, it will take a long time, but Greg was right. We have a moral obligation to do all we can to get that international work moving. Above all, we want to see this country as a full partner at the negotiating table, doing all we can, and much more than now, to disarm and control nuclear weapons all over the world. Like many people who have spoken today, I hope we'll see a time when the UK can renounce its nuclear weapons. But Christine Cheng was correct. In a more unstable world, with an expansionist and aggressive Russia, now is not the time to send a message that we might have second thoughts about standing up for our people and our NATO allies. And I agree with Alistair Carmichael and Greg Simpson that in an unstable world and with Brexit on the horizon, now is not the time to turn our backs on NATO. For months, we've campaigned up and down the country saying that by remaining in the European Union, we can promote peace and security. Now is not the time to walk away from our European commitments. Now is not the time to risk a new big rift with our allies in Europe and in NATO. Amendment 1 suggests we should cancel the successor program and put a big bonanza of money into the conventional defence forces. And some of the blogs I've read over the last few days, people have used figures like 200 billion and so forth. Now, that sounds great. That sounds great with the sort of slogan you might put on a focus leaflet or perhaps on the side of a bus. Now, what the slogan on the side of a bus doesn't tell you is that only CND uses the 200 billion figure and no independent commentators support it. The true cost may end up half that or much less. What the slogan on the bus wouldn't say is that the investment in Trident's successor will be spread over 30 or 40 years, and some years capital spending will go up and others it will go down. What the slogan on the bus wouldn't say is if we did away with Trident right now and cancelled the replacement program, we'd have to decommission the current system as well as Fastlane and Aldermaston. But then, if we wanted to maintain submarine building skills and facilities, we'd probably need to run the Astute program on. So we'd see no real savings from Trident for at least 10 years. And even then, there's no guarantee there'd be enough money to effect a major transformation in the armed forces. We don't know what the total defence budget would be over 30 or 40 years, and we don't know how the diverted money would be used. That is neither an honest nor a responsible way to address the funding of our armed forces. The policy paper says that if the Liberal Democrats are in government after the next general election, the next Strategic Defence and Security Review should take a fresh look at the projected and committed costs of the Dreadnought programme. So we have an emergency brake if by 2020 the costs have got too far out of hand. And as a party, we'll need to come back to the hard questions around the funding of the armed forces. But we need to do better than the empty promises offered by Amendment 1. David and Julian raise a good point about new cyber warfare and underwater drones and how they could impact on the ability of submarines to maintain the advantage of stealth. But as stealth technologies develop, so will counter-stealth technologies. And no one can say for sure how soon it will be before this advantage is fully compromised, who will get there first, and whether effective and deployable countermeasures should be deployed. Des Brown has talked a lot about this issue. He's never actually said, pull the plug on the program. What he said is, improve the accountability, couldn't agree more with that, fund R&D spending more, and keep a close eye on costs. So that's why this paper calls for more R&D spending on high-tier cyber threats and marine robotics, sensing and communications techniques. And the proposed review we'd conduct in 2020-21 would look at the impact of the programme on the programme of changing technological developments. So, Conference, I ask you to vote for this motion unamended, to keep faith with all of our values as an internationalist party that believes in advancing our goals of peace and security by working as part of NATO, the United Nations and the European Union within the framework of international law, and to hold fast to our decades-long commitment to a UK defence and security capability that can protect all our people and all our allies from attack, dealing with the realities of the world as it is and continuing to strive for our vision as it ought to be. I urge you to vote for this motion and reject Amendment 1.
Thank you, Neil. Conference, we're now going to move to a series of two votes. The first on Amendment 1, which is at page 13 of Conference Daily. The second on the motion as a whole, either amended or not. It's at page 45 of the agenda. So could I see all of your cards vote with the word me? We're going to vote on Amendment 1 first of all. Can I see all those people who are in favour of Amendment 1? Thank you. Can I see all those against Amendment 1, please? Can I see that again, please? All right, it's going to be quicker if we count it. I can see enough people on their feet. We better count it. Would the stewards prepare for a count, please? I did half suspect this might happen. We are prepared and ready. The stewards are now going to count the votes manually in the auditorium, one by one. By blocks. So could I please have some order in the hall while the stewards get into position, and when I'm told the stewards are ready, I will take the vote again. It's very important when you vote, please, if you can, to hold your card up as high as possible so the stewards can see it. If you have difficulty doing that for various reasons, then you may want to ask somebody sitting next to you to hold up your card for you. If the stewards are all in position and ready, we're ready. I will now ask, please, to see all those in favour of Amendment 1. please have some quiet in the hall while the votes are counted up by the stewards. And if you hold your cards, please nice and high so they can see the word voting. Thank you very much. Put your cards down, please. Can I see all those against Amendment 1? Right, that's now going to be counted in the same way by the stewards block by block, so we can have an absolutely accurate tally of votes. Some quiet in the hall, please. It's quite a tricky job for the stewards to count all these votes up. They're doing that bit by bit and block by block. And what will happen after that is all the figures will be totalled up and they'll be given to us up here for us to announce. Could the stewards please come down to the front, those who finished their blocks, and we will begin the totalling process. You can put your hands down now, please. That's concluded. Can I ask you all to pay some tribute to the stewards, please? They really do a fantastic job. Thank you. They really are the backbone of what goes on in this auditorium. Without them, conference would be much the worse for it. There's clearly no point in taking any further votes while that's being totted up. So what I'm going to do is announce to you, if I may, the winner of the emergency motions ballot. As you'll know, the drama never ends. It's from one dramatic moment to another. And I can tell you the winner of the emergency motions ballot, which will be debated tomorrow morning, is the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children motion. I get the sense that's something you're all very happy about. We'll be debating that first thing tomorrow morning. Looking forward to tomorrow, we have a number of controversial debates in the morning. If this wasn't controversial enough, particularly the role of faith in state-funded schools and also associate citizenship of the European Union. If you want to put any cards in for the debates tomorrow morning, please try and do so tonight if you can, or as early as possible, because it really does help the chairs of the sessions to plan these debates as early as possible. The stewards are now diligently totalling up the figures. I ought to echo my apologies to those in the next session. We have quite significantly overrun. I thought we might, but it was important to call as many speakers as we could, and we did start a little late. So the stewards are now totalling those figures up, and they'll be handed up to the platform shortly, and I will tell you what the outcome is. What we'll do after this is move to a debate on the motion as a whole, either amended or not. And the results are in. On Amendment 1, for the amendment, there were 244 votes, and against the amendment, there were 428 votes. It's clearly lost. It shows I was right to count it. Right. We're now going to vote on the motion as a whole, unamended. So could I see all those people in favour of the motion, please? And all those against, please. Can I see all those in favour again, please? And all those against? That motion is carried. Could I thank all the contributors to this debate? Could I thank my aides Mary Reid and Alex Hegenbarth, and with apologies to Liz Lim for the overrunning of that session, I now hand to her for the parliamentary party reports. Thank you very much.
Audio, but not video. Yeah, there we go. That's working. So. Oh shit, I've got two instances now. That's it. Okay, so that's really easy.
on the parliamentary reports. Just to let everyone know, there were no actual questions into the parliamentary report, but we do need to hear from all three of them, from the Commons, the European Parliament and the Lords. And first and foremost, our Senator Tom Gray has actually given a report on what's been happening over the last year in the Lords. In the Commons, sorry.
Thank you very much. And first of all, can I congratulate those of you who have stayed? I suspect that the parliamentary party reports may be a little bit of an anticlimax after the vote that we've just had, but thank you for hanging on in there. In my last report, I reflected on what had been a pretty turbulent summer.
By no less than 12.5%. So we're very pleased. And you'll have seen Sarah at conference, I'm sure, over the last couple of days, and she is a fantastic addition to the party, and she's already making a real impact. And that, for my Commons colleagues, is just as important as it is for the wider membership of the party. Now, with a UKIP-like government staggering mindlessly towards a hard Brexit and a Labour Party more concerned with internal troubles than they are with providing meaningful opposition, there is now a clear recognition that Liberal Democrats are needed more than ever. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank those, many of whom I'm sure in this room today, who went to help with the Richmond Park by-election, but also the campaigns, the successful campaigns in Witney, Sleaford, Stoke and Copeland. Now, in Parliament, it's not surprising that Brexit has kept members of Parliament pretty occupied over the last few months. There are, of course, other bills going through, although they're not very substantive compared to. So, for instance, we have had the Higher Education and Research Bill, a bill which was deeply flawed, led for us by John Pugh, very ably, laying down amendments, which I'm afraid to say, as is always the case for Liberal Democrat amendments, were not accepted. But I think it's widely recognised that that bill had really become irrelevant given the impact of Brexit on higher education. But the government nonetheless have proceeded with this in a way that I think is irresponsible. We have also had the passing of the Article 50 bill. I don't need to say very much about that, although again, none of our amendments, whether it was in the Commons or the Lords, were accepted on that. And we will continue to press the government on all aspects of those proposals, but particularly our campaign to try and secure a vote people on the terms of the deal, but also the rights of EU citizens and, of course, of UK citizens in other EU countries. So finally, to end on a positive note, I would like to say that we welcome, of course, the constant rise in party membership. I know that many people, when Tim, me included, when Tim said, well, we're going to set a target of 100,000, I thought that was on the edge of being reckless, perhaps just overly ambitious, but I think with 85,000 so far, I think that is a perfectly achievable target. And what we hope, of course, is that with the round of elections that we've got in May, that many of those new members, people like Sarah Olney has really set a standard for others. Unfortunately, some people who've left, of course. We've had Rosie Gray and more recently Giles Derrington who have left. But the team that we have working for us, Jack Fletcher, Joe Edwards, Ewan, Jenny, Sophie, and in terms of our advisors, Venus, Rosie, Claire, Rosie Schimmel and Fiona Todd are all making a fantastic contribution to the team, and we really couldn't do the job without their very able support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you. And we'll have the vote on all the reports after all the speakers. So first of all, Catherine.
Okay, from me next. It's quite a relief, I suppose, for us as parliamentarians not to have any questions put in, but it's always a disappointment because I think it is really beholden on people who elect us and get us here to question and to keep those people who are elected. So next conference, please try harder, and we want some questions. Really, you have the reports you have my report on what I've been doing in the European Parliament. It isn't a lonely furrow that I plough there. I sit with 68 other Liberals from across the European Union. 20 countries are represented in our group, and it is a busy time, but I do concentrate on protecting the natural environment. As you know, the environment is my bag, and I'm really delighted that I sit on the Environment Committee. I recently, since we last were meeting as a conference, I took my report on the illegal wildlife trade, responding to the Commission's action plan, and took that through the Parliament, and only 5 people in the whole of the Parliament voted against it. They happen to be UKIP and National Front. So that was a huge vote of support for that. But passing a report is only one point, and we now have to keep pushing on the action. The serious and organised crime network of Europol, we need to make sure that wildlife crime is included in that, and that comes up in the next month in front of the Council. And also it calls for a complete and absolute ban on all ivory sold in the European Union. And that's going to be a big ask because there are works of art, but we need to be able to say that there is no place in any market for ivory. Ivory should only be of value when it is on a living animal. And so that is another thing that I will be working hard on at a European level. You will remember that I also worked on air pollution, and that is still a hot topic, especially in London. But we are seeing municipalities across Europe. Barcelona is a great one, where they are banning diesel cars, so some good work on that. I also have palm oil, is a report coming up very soon. The committees is where we do all the heavy lifting. But of course, the big topic is Brexit, and how I will be involved in that is still emerging. Whether we do it in committees or whether as a parliament we do it as set up a new committee. But I have set up a cross-party, I convene a cross-party group of pro-European MEPs, and we meet monthly to get ourselves up to speed on the issues. And boy, are there a lot of issues. We are really lucky that we have Guy Verhofstadt. Don't ever call him Guy. I know the Brits like to do that. He doesn't like it. Guy Verhofstadt is very fair. He is a liberal to his toes. He's absolutely on our side, but he's also on Europe's side. He wants the best outcome for Europe. But he used to manage Belgium, so he can manage this. The committees have come forward with a huge dossier of issues that they're going to look at, and that is available on the website if you're interested in that. I now have a string of businesses and organisations wanting to pick my brains about Brexit. It's going to go on and on. But I am writing to ministers in this country and asking them what is the price tag on all of the Brexit the topics, and we're keeping that up, writing questions. Just very finally, I know I'm running out of time. You'll know I'm a questor in the Parliament, which is a representative for all the MEPs, but it gives me a place on the Bureau of the Parliament. But also I'm responsible for all the art, and I've set up an exhibition next week where all the staff and the MEPs were invited to submit some of their paintings or works of art, and that is a really fun exhibition that's going on next week. I'm embarrassed that there is only one MEP put their work of art submitted, and I'm even more embarrassed that it was mine, but at least on my I shall be able to say exhibited in the European Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And finally, Dick Newby for the Lords.
Well, our recent life has been completely dominated by the Article 50 bill, where in the Lords we sought to press and did press amendments on 4 issues: maintaining our membership of the single market, protecting EU citizens, giving people a vote on the final deal, also giving Parliament a meaningful vote on the way to that final popular vote. All of these amendments were predictably met by scorn and derision by the government and the Brexiters. We were accused, this most terrible thing, by the government of actually only doing it because we wanted to win votes, a concept which, of course, totally alien to the Conservative Party. With Labour, it was a bit more complicated. They opposed staying in the single market because that vote came before Stoke, and they were worried about UKIP. They opposed our referendum amendment on the grounds that it was too complicated for the people to understand these things, except, of course, if public opinion changed, and then perhaps they could have a vote after all. And on EU citizens and the meaningful vote, we worked together, won at first instance, came back to the Lords, and they caved in. And it took a former law lord to remind the House that ping-pong is a game in which you don't stop once you've hit the ball over the net once, a concept which Labour couldn't understand. We maintained our support for the crucial amendments to the last. We were fortunate in being supported by a number of Labour and crossbench peers at every point, and by the redoubtable Patience Wheatcroft. I was leading on some of these things, and the great thing was we had huge energy and support for what we were doing from the group. Behind me, it was like, as we were missing the rugby, being at the front of a scrum with a whole posse of people behind you urging you on. I was particularly grateful to Sarah Ludford and Johnny Oates, who moved some of the key amendments, and to Ben Stoneham, my chief whip. We managed to get a 95% turnout in one of the votes, which was just about a record for the House of Lords. And even our opponents, and indeed enemies, had to accept that while they hated what they were doing, they had to be impressed by the unity and conviction with which we were doing it. We've also been spending quite a lot of time talking to local parties about what we're up to, and the message that we get back is, first of all, that we've now got clarity on our European message, which they welcome, but they have said time and time again that they want us to be more belligerent. So I intend to be more belligerent. I'm sure the group will want to be more belligerent, and that is our aim in the months ahead. I should finally just thank our terrific group of staff in the Whip's office, Elizabeth Plummer, Humphrey Amos, Sarah Pugh and Dave Shaw. It really has been a terrific team effort.
Thank you very much. Can I just say thank you on behalf of the party to all our parliamentarians. I think you're all doing just a splendid job, whether it's in the Commons, in the European Parliament, Catherine, on your own, and in the House of Lords. And we now have to move to a vote to receive the reports. So we take the reports individually. Can I see a vote in favour to receive the Commons report? All those in favour? All those against? Well, I think that's passed overwhelmingly. And we move to the European Parliament report. Vote to receive that. All those in favour? All those against? Again, overwhelmingly. And I know Catherine is vastly relieved. And moving to the House of Lords. All those in favour? All those against? Yet again. So congratulations to all of you. And thank you. And sorry for the delay again.